What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over how we can add runs into our game, so running on our characters, as well as how we can update our dash logic to work for some of the things that we added after we set up the initial dash that no longer allowed the dash to work properly. So we're basically going to be taking a look at our dash system, our running system, being able to use them both on the same character when we want to, and separating them so that certain characters can have either a backward and a forward dash, a backward and a forward run, or a backward dash and a forward run, like in this case what I'm going to use on the mutant. So just a quick reminder of everything we got going on. If I am to press backward twice, I can do a backward dash. Previously, pressing forward twice would do a forward dash, but instead I am now going to be able to run. At the current time, it is the exact same speed as my walk, but say I am to perform it just like this, you can see I am able to run into my opponent and push them like usual. From here, of course, you could do things like have running attacks or other functionality that could be important when you're trying to, kind of play with your opponent's mind, play mind games, play footsies with them, all those sort of things that could be affected by this. So we have running in, and we have the actual functionality behaving as expected for how to trigger it, how to stop it. We can run as long as we want, and then once we release the button, we stop running. Unlike a dash where even if we hold it, we only dash the one time, and then we go into our walking backwards state. Alright, so we'll be setting up all this logic today, so you can add a few other things. We still have to cover rolls. That's the last form of movement. We've done rolls on wake-ups, but rolls in this sense are a little bit different. We need to also be able to configure their distance when we're rolling on characters. So we have a few things to cover with this movement tech, but this is a good step, and again, running is quite different from dashing, so I'm pretty excited to do this one today. But to hop into it today, if you'd like to get caught up in the series, we're on episode 140 of the fighting game tutorial. So we've done quite a bit of work. We still have a ton to do before we're at a finished product. But if you'd like to get caught up, I'll link this playlist in the top right corner right here. That is the entire fighting game playlist, so you can check out everything we've done. And as we add more to it, it'll also populate in that playlist. Alternatively, you can click this iCard in the top right corner right here. And this will be where we initially set up dash logic, which we're still going to be using today. That's not changing. We're just adding more logic to it. Okay, so let's get started. In today's episode, we're going to need to visit both the code, the blueprints, the animation blueprint. We have quite a bit of different areas that we're going to be modifying today. Let's start with the code because we have some fundamental changes that I want to introduce. Really additions, not changes, but they're going to make our game a lot better for a lot of reasons, not just dashes and running. First things first, let's go into our fighter template character, or basically our base character.h class. Previously, we've had this enum character state that determines what the character is doing based on the player input. So remember, this is different from things like combo state, and there's also an attack state. So the character state is specifically related to the movement that the player is trying to perform. So crouching, crouch, blocking. You have your neutral jump, forward jump, backward jump, blocking. And then we had our no action, which is our default. And then we had moving forward, moving backward. I had technically put in running forward and running backward, but we never used them. Now I've also added a dashing forward and a dashing backward. So it's very possible that you won't want both running and dashing. If you don't and you just want one or the other, that's fine. You don't need both of these. If you do want them and you might want to switch them up between characters, that's fine. I'd recommend adding both dashing backward, and running forward, dashing forward enums. Once you have these enums in here, even though we've never set up anything for running forward, running backward, dashing forward, dashing backward, we're going to be using them today to change how our movement works, how we can access them. Instead of just using a command and going off the command logic, we can use the command to set a state instead of triggering the animation directly from that. And then we can, as with any other state, go from there to determine the logic if we want to go into that animation, if we want to go into a combo. So after you've added those enum values, let's go ahead and scroll down to our fcommand structure. Fcommand here is the structure that we have that fills up our command list. So we have our command list, and we can do things like standard light attack, which is a basic, we press one button, we perform the light attack. We also have things like our jumping light, so we can determine the state that's required. We have to be jumping, and we have to press the light attack to perform that action. Then we have commands that are performed by multiple buttons. So like fireball is, I think it's back, forward, medium, but whatever it is basically several inputs that have to be input to perform the action. We have charge attacks, so we have to hold back for a certain number of frames before we can perform an action. We have multiple button inputs, as I like to call them, so if we have to hold two at the same time, like for throws. Now, what I want to do is add something else to this fcommand structure, and I'm calling it the resulting state. So we have a required state, eCharacter state required state. And essentially what this means is if we want to perform this action, we have to be in this state. Now, you can either leave this optional or default if there's certain actions you want to be able to do that aren't from idle. And we've talked about that. However, this resulting state is new. I've just added it for this episode. The resulting state is what state I want the character to go to after performing this command. This is important because for a lot of the attacks, it might not matter. We can just leave them at the character state they're in, change their attack state, which we're already doing in the code and in the animation blueprint, and then let the rest of the logic fill out, go through the animation blueprint, play the animation, all that stuff. But what about a command that doesn't perform an attack necessarily, but rather an action? And it's also customizable depending on if we want to be able to hold the button afterward or just tap it. So for example, a dash, I just tap the button twice to use it. The run, I can actually just hold the button and continuously run in that direction. Okay? So a good way to differentiate these is by having a resulting state that once we perform a command, we can actually force the character to go into that state. By doing this, by performing a dash command, we can set them into the dashing forward or dashing backward state, which then allows us to further differentiate logic and divert logic in the future. So that's what resulting state is going to be used for. Make sure you add this to your fcommand. Once you do that, we can go down to our start command function. So I've got a lot of logic here. Start command is right here. Start command is essentially where we actually we've already determined that the inputs in the input buffer match one of the input lists for a command, and we can perform that command. When we can perform that command, we go ahead and set a boolean has used command to be true, and this is how our character knows that they can go ahead and perform that animation, they can perform that command. But there's something else I'd like to do as well. If the command that we're on has a resulting state and it's not equal to the default value, which of course it will default to the standard value in the enum. So if we manually set a resulting state on this command, then I want to set the character state to be that resulting state. Notice I put it at the end here, so it's only once we've used the command that this happens. So for example, say we use dash forward command, then if we had the resulting state on the dash forward command to be the forward dash character state, our character's character state can go to the forward dash. So we can literally say, oh, the player used the dash command, the character should go to the dash forward state. Or the player used the running forward command, the character should go to the running forward character state. So this is super simple. This is all we need to add. Specifically doing it when it's not a default value, because I don't want to force the character to be default in all these cases. Sometimes we're not going to want this. In fact, a lot of times we're not going to want to set the character state or force the character state to a specific value. So we can skip it if it's the default and we haven't actually added one for it. So literally we go character commands, which is our command list. We grab the current command that we're looping through. We've covered all of start command many times and added to it many times throughout the series, so I'm not going to go through the rest of the function. But basically we're grabbing the command that we care about, the command that the character is willing and able to use. We're now grabbing our new resulting state variable, making sure it's not equal to the default character state enum value. Then we're setting the character's character state value to the resulting state that we just found in the if statement above. All right. Now there's something else we have to change in the code, but let's go back into the editor and let's go into Unreal for a second. I'm going to go into my base character BP or my mutant BP. I'm specifically going to go into my mutant blueprint because this is where I have my character commands set up, since every character can have a different command list. So I'm going to do this on my mutant. I've closed all my other commands except for forward dash and backward dash. Now right now it is called dash and not like forward running, but imagine this is interchangeable, and what I'm going to do to switch between them is change this resulting state enum. Of course we'll explain why and how that works when we get there. But take a look at forward dash. So our inputs for it are forward press, forward press. So if I just tap forward, forward within 12 frames, then I can perform a dash. That's how this works. The required state is no action, so it means we can either do it from idle, or basically we have no limit on when we can do it. If that is found, we can use it. The resulting state currently is running forward, so once this command is found, we're going to set the character state to be running forward, which we can then use to enter that animation and start that logic. To show you that this works, I can actually switch it to my dashing forward on this command. And then when we get into the game, remember at the start of this episode, I was using the double tap forward to run forward as opposed to dash forward. So we were able to run forward, but we were dashing backward, okay? We weren't able to dash forward. Now if I do this, you can see I can dash forward. I can't run forward anymore because I changed that one resulting enum. I can still dash backward and everything like normal. Okay, so I'm going to switch this back to running forward, but you can see how effective this is, that we can set the state that's going to come when we enter this command and enter another state. Now backward dash is the same thing. So I have my inputs of backward press, can do it from any state or idle. And then my resulting state on backward dash is dashing backward. All right. So that's how it has to be set up in the mutant BP or your character BP to perform these actions: running forward, running backward, dashing forward, dashing backward. I don't do anything with running backward specifically in this episode, but really a running backward would be if you're facing your opponent, you go to dash backward. If you have it as running backward instead, probably turn around, run that way into the opposite wall so you can run away from your opponent to get some distance. Again, don't have that right now, but it's super easy to set up. You could literally set it up with the exact same logic we're going to use today. You would just change the animation and make a new state in the animation blueprint. All right, so from here, now that we have our input set up, let's go back into the code. I just want to show you how that worked. There's one thing we need to do in the move right and move right controller function at 4 different spots. Basically, everywhere we're going to set walking forward, walking backward, or moving forward, moving backward, whatever you're calling these states, the moving forward, the moving backward states. We need to add some logic to kind of safeguard them, because if we don't, what's going to happen is we can either overwrite moving forward with running forward by mistake, or the other way around. We can overwrite running forward with moving forward. This can cause us to cancel our animations and our commands early. So we just have to make sure we're not already in one of those other states, because we don't want to screw up our logic and then cancel running to go to standard moving just by holding the button. That doesn't make any sense. So right now, let's go down to move right. So here's my move right function. We do a lot in here. We have this first really big if statement to determine and see if what input icon we can add to the screen, if it's a mode that should display that. And that goes all the way to here. Okay. Then we have another if statement to determine if we should do a roll recovery or some sort of standard wake up as well. Not worried about any of that right now. Then we have this if statement, which is where we actually determine if we can move left or right at the current time. And if we can, we determine if it's air movement or ground movement or crouching movement. Then if we go through all that, we determine if the value is basically left or right, and if we've released the old axis. We've got a lot of logic in here. The logic you're looking for, there's 4 points in each move right and move right controller. There are 4 lines, 2 for moving backward and 2 for moving forward, where we set the character state to that value. That's what you're looking for today. So you can go to where I'm at, or you can specifically look in your logic for character state equals E character state E moving backward, and character state equals E character state E moving forward. Again, they're going to be next to each other, because the logic is organized. It's just, there's a lot, and I understand it is confusing to look at. I even get confused looking at it a lot of time, and I wrote it just because there is so much, because there are so many specific instances that we need to be aware of in the fighting game. So where I have my if value is greater than 0.01, I was setting my character state to be moving backward if they're not facing right. Okay. Now, the problem with just doing this, now that we have these other states, is move right is an axis mapping. The axis mapping will fire every frame to grab the value that is being pressed on the controller or the keyboard. So in this case, this is standard move right, this is the keyboard. So if I'm not holding left or right, it's going to go to the default, the idle. But if I am, it's going to go to this state every single time. So say I am holding left, say I'm holding right and I'm not facing right, then I am going to go to the moving backward state, which is correct. However, if I'm already in the dashing backward or the running backward state, I don't want to override it and go to the moving backward state. That would cancel out of my other states that I'm in, and we shouldn't do that. We should only enter this if we're not already in a state related to that. All right, so it's very simple what we're doing here. It just took a lot of explaining because I want to make sure we're all on the same page. So before we set the character state to be moving backward now, we were just doing this without an if statement. I've added an if statement to make sure that the current character state is not equal to E character state dashing backward, and the character state is not equal to E character state running backward. All right. Now, we had an else statement before. It wasn't an else if, it was literally just an else, and we were setting the character state to be moving forward. Again, this was fine before, but we have to be careful. If we're already dashing forward or already running forward, and these animations take more than 1 frame, so if I'm in the middle of those animations and I'm still holding my forward, I don't want to just switch back to moving forward. If I do, I'm going to stop running and just start walking forward again, which again is not what we want here. We want to make sure we release the button before we do any of that logic. So if we're already in the dashing forward or the running forward state, we don't want to go to moving forward. So I turn my else into an else if character state is not equal to dashing forward and character state is not equal to running forward. From here, it's really simple because these same 2 if statements are going to be used again within the function, the same function, move right, under the other case. So this is if we were holding right or pressing right, and now this is if we're pressing or holding left. So if we're pressing left and we are facing right, we're moving backward. So we got to do our if statement to make sure that we're not dashing or running backward. And this time, we want to check and make sure that if we're going to go move forward, that our character state is not already dashing forward or running forward. All right. With that in place, we can go down, scroll down to move right controller, and we want to do the same thing. So you can scroll down to that same section and move right controller. It's pretty much the exact same code at this point, but we have, all the way at the bottom, we have 4 character state sets, 2 to moving backward, 2 to moving forward, and it's the same deal. So this top one, we are pressing right. So if we're not facing right and we're pressing right, we're moving backward. We want to make sure the character state is not already dashing backward and the character state is not already running backward. Okay, alternatively, we are pressing right, but we are facing right, which means we're moving forward. And so we want to make sure the character state is not already dashing forward and the character state is not already running forward. Okay, now we can be pressing left but facing right, which means we're moving backward. So our character state should not be dashing backward and the character state should not be running backward before setting this to moving backward. Lastly, we're pressing left and we're facing left, so the character is moving forward. So the character state should not be dashing forward and the character state should not be running forward. Those are the code changes we have to make in move right and move right controller. That will make it so we don't accidentally override our dashing or running forward or backward enums with a standard moving enum, and then cancel out of our dashes or runs early. Alright, once we have that in place, we can go into our mutant and MVP, or whatever character you're doing this on, and there's a few things that we have to do and change to make everything work as expected. So first thing I'm going to do from there is I'm going to go into my state machine, and I'm going to look at the transition rules that I already have set up. So I previously had idle to dash forward and dash backward. It's a little hard to see. There's a lot going on, which is why we have to convert this state machine into code in the near future. I promise I am working on that in the background. It will be converted entirely to code. You can continue to use the state machine if you want, but it just gets very confusing to look at. Point is, you can see that idle does not have a transition to dash forward or dash backward, okay? It actually doesn't anymore. It did previously. I've removed them. Don't worry, of course we're going to add them back. But we're actually going to add them from the walking forward and walking backward states. Because you can't technically reach either of these, the dashes or the runs, from the idle state, since they will enter the walking forward, walking backward state. You can maybe enter them if you were to, say, block, enter your inputs, and allow that. But we haven't gone over that sort of transitioning yet. And so I'm not going to add it now for this specific case. But don't worry. There are other things we can do in the future to make those sort of things work. For now, when we're just using a standard state machine, it's going to go and always take the routes that it knows. We're going to be in moving forward if we're pressing right at all. Right, or if we're pressing right and facing right, or pressing left and facing left. So, with that said, we're going to be in walking forward, even if it's just to skip it. If it's one frame, it transitions here and transitions here in the same instance, in the same action. We're still going to go here, and then we can transition here. So, with that in mind, we don't want idle to these states. You could make it work that way, but there's a little bit more logic you have to add, because otherwise it's going to play twice. And like I keep saying, we just really don't need it. You could make it work, but it's not necessary. It's more work that way. So I don't have anything from idle to dash forward or dash backward, or really idle to running forward, which is my new state. So just keep that in mind. I got rid of the 2 old anim notifies for them. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at the dash forward and dash backward to idle anim notifies and the transition logic. These had already existed prior, which is why I'm going to cover them first. Then we'll get into the run. So I do have dash forward back to idle, that transition. That is currently automatic rule based, and I'm using my end attack transition start transition event. So end attack transition is something we've set up in the code a long time ago, which determines what should happen when we return to idle when we previously used a command or an attack, something like that. I'm considering dashes, they are commands, so I'm considering them command. So this is really like end command transition, but essentially this is just, that's what it is. When we end an attack or a command, we go into this. We've done this a ton of times throughout the series, so you're familiar with it if you've been watching through, but I just wanted to explain that if you haven't. And we were setting the character to be able to move again and resetting the attack state so that they can do all their standard stuff with their attacks, their startup, their active, their recovery when they use another attack. I'm doing something additional here because we didn't have to care about this before. When we used attacks, this character state would be naturally reset when the hitboxes were done and the character returned to idle. But since we have a little bit more complexity now with our movement, it's important that we do reset this value when we need to. And so if we're going to allow the dash to be a command, we press it, we perform the command, then we return to idle, has no user control, we do want to reset the character state back to the default value. So on end attack transition, end jump transition, end throw transition, they all go to the same logic here. I've added one additional node here, character reference, set character state, and I've set it back to no action, the default value. Alright. So, in the previous episodes, this is what we had. We had automatic rule-based, and we had end attack transition. Now, dash backward is the same. Dash backward to idle, it's automatic rule based, and it's end attack transition in the start transition event. Just to give you the full rundown, I do have apply forward dash, apply backward dash on the fully blended state events, but this is all covered in that dash episode. Nothing's changed. Basically, this is where the forces are applied at what point of the animation and how much of the dash distance is used. On top of that, all that's in here is a dashing animation that does not loop, and it has this dash ended anim notify that allows it to do other things, such as stop the movement immediately or determine other actions to go from there. If you'd like to see it, just as a refresher, F-ended goes into the standard ended logic. Okay. We also have backward dash ended here, which, as you can imagine, if we go back into our graph, go into dash backward, here are my settings for my backward dash, and I have backward dash ended anim notify, which is right here. Alright, with that said, you are all caught up on all the dashing logic that we had in the previous episode, as well as the minor adjustments that I made, such as removing access from idle to those dashes. So now let's take a look at what I've done for that. So walking forward, I only have being able to go to dash forward. I don't have it being able to go to dash backward. Technically, you could press the backward button twice while you're walking forward, but I have intentionally the backward input cancel out the forward movement. So if we're walking backward and we press backward, fine, it's going to capture it as an input, but I don't necessarily want to be able to dash from there because I don't want them being holding both of those inputs at the same time. So I only have walking forward to dashing forward, but you can adjust that to your liking. So it's a little bit, it's really, really light here, but I do have a transition rule that's a light gray here on a gray background, nice color choice. And this is my walking forward to my dash forward command. Now, previously, this is how I was using the idle to dash forward. I had the character reference, I was grabbing the commands array at the dash forward index, index 10, and then I was breaking the command to check the has used command boolean. However, I don't actually want to do that anymore. You can still do it. The problem with doing that is it doesn't go off the state anymore. So if we don't set the character state to the proper value, you could still enter a dash. And you may want to avoid that because you might want to enter the dashing forward state, say that the inputs are pressed correctly. But you either do a cancel, you do an attack. From there, all it knows is that the command was pressed, and that's all it cares about. But now we care about this state, so we can do additional things in it, okay? So instead of doing that, like I do for a lot of my commands, what I do is this action where I grab the character reference, grab the character state from it, do an equal on enum, and then I select the type I'm looking for. So to go from walking to dashing, I go dashing forward is the enum value that I need, and plug that into the result. Okay, so walking forward to dashing forward looks like that. And then I still use my standard command, start transition event, start attack transition. Okay, I do this for all my other start attack. All my other commands have this. And start attack actually stops the... Start attack stops the movement of the character and does some additional stuff with commands to reset their values. Like to reset a command once it's been used so it doesn't get used again in loop. Unless the player enters the data again. And then trigger attack startup. Resets old variables that we actually don't really use anymore, but I haven't entirely cleaned up yet. And then clears any old hitboxes, if there's any lingering hitboxes from a cancel, that sort of thing. So we call this on all our commands, so I'm still calling it here in the dash, as you can see here. Alright, that's officially everything for dash forward, so now you're all caught up on that. I did make it a shared transition rule, If you're on a transition rule and you hit promote to shared, it'll let you name it. I did that so I can potentially dash from other things, like from the end of an attack state, you know, have some dash tech in there, but I don't do anything with it yet, so just note that's why this says dashing forward, is I made a shared rule for it. Let's go ahead and get dashing backward working properly, and then we'll go into the running. So walking backward is the only state I have that can go to the dashing backward state right now. So it's this red line that you see here. And this is the transition rule, walking backward to dash backward. All right, so let's go into the transition rule. And you see I have the same logic that I did for the other one. So I had idle. If you were in the idle state, you could go to dashing backward by triggering the character command at index 11. Index 11 is my backward dash. Okay, but like I said before, we now want to have the state system set up because it allows us a lot more freedom with where we can go from it. It doesn't matter that we just use the Boolean and we just use the command, but it also matters that we're in the right state still. We haven't canceled out. We haven't been canceled out by some attack that got dealt to us. We haven't entered like a super move, because that also can affect it. You know, we don't want to, anything we can cancel to, anything that can alter what the characters are doing, we can track with the states. We can't track it with just the standard command. So I'm doing the same thing for the dashing backward as I was the dashing forward. Just make sure to change your enum to dashing backward. All right, let's go back to that transition rule. You can see that I actually did not put start attack transition. That's on me. But there you go. So make sure you have start attack transition on that transition rule. And yeah, you're good to go. Cool. Now with that, we can have our running forward. We can have the running as well. So like I said, idle to running does not exist. We're also going to be handling the running from the same direction, either walking backward or walking forward. In this case, I only have running forward, like I said. So I have a transition rule from walking forward to running forward. So go ahead and make a new state. I technically am using the same command for both these because I'm triggering them in the same way. That's why I can't have the character do both at the same time, because they're the same inputs. But you definitely could have a dash and a run on that character at one time in the same direction. You would just have to change the inputs that are used. You could actually differentiate it with a press and a hold as well. But we're not going to do that right now. Okay, so walking forward, like I said, I've got a transition rule from walking forward to this new state I made. So make a state, call it whatever you want, just make sure it's your running forward state. Let's take a look at it. I have a mutant running animation. Okay. It's got no anim notifies, and it's just a running loop. I have the animation set to looping in this case because I want the player to be able to hold it as long as they want and continuously run. Even if they're running into a wall or an opponent, that's up to them. If they want to do that, I'm fine with that. It's not like the dash where it's one thing and then return to idle. This is, they can control if they're running, just like they can control if they're walking. So it loops and it plays that animation. Simple enough. Now, I don't have anything on this actual state as far as transition events, so it's not like the dash is where I'm applying additional distance. This is where you could change the speed. You could go into the code, set a variable to change the maximum walk speed for running. We'll be doing that for sure. We actually have a lot to do with that still. That'll be part of combat flow, so don't worry about it too much right now. You can feel free to mess with it and alter it to your liking right now. But we'll definitely be covering it. I'm not just leaving it. It's just not necessary right now. All right, so let's go back to our transition rule. It's this blue one here, indigo. And so the transition rule itself, I know it's kind of being covered right now by this other one, but the transition rule itself is this right here. So instead of looking for the dashing forward state, we're specifically looking for the running forward state. That's why when I changed my resulting state from dashing forward to running forward, I could only do that appropriate one, because I'm specifically looking for the running forward enum to go into this running forward animation. All right. And now, with that done, let's go back into this transition rule. Whoops. Not double click, just single click. Scroll down. You'll notice I don't have transition events. This is not a bug. This one is not a bug. The running actually works off of the player's movement, the player's inputs that they press. So if the player is still continuously running forward, I'm going to allow them to run forward, which means I don't want to do the start attack transition, which does things like forces the character to stop moving and resets the command, because that's actually not what's going on here. We're not ready to reset the command yet. We're not ready to stop them from moving yet. All this is still valid at this point because they're still pressing it, they're still holding it. And so I intentionally don't have anything to reset that. It's just we go into the animation, and then you'll see more logic in a minute when we return to idle. So no transition events here. Just if the character stays running forward, we enter this event. Now, instead of doing automatic rule-based, the way we return from this is to have the character state as default. I specifically say default and not something like not running forward, because if I'm going from running forward to idle, I want it to be because the character state is idle or is not no action. Maybe you want to be able to run forward into an attack or something, and I don't want to just go from running forward to that attack or to idle when I'm trying to do that if my character state changes. So I'd rather just be specific and say if we're going running forward to idle, it's because our character state is now no action, the default, idle, whatever you want to call this state. Now, once we go from here, so this is the running to idle, I do have end attack transition here. So I do reset some of the variables, such as the attack state, the character state. Once the character state is reset, then this is good to go. You'll continuously be able to use this as you go in. You can come in here and run as many times as you want without issue. Skip everything here. And so let's go down to our mutant and see how everything is. Here we go. Here's the character details. And so we can run. Then when we stop, we go to no action. Run, no action. If it's dash, it's default and just resets right away, right? So there you go. And you can see that and how that works. Now, one thing we should look at is our command list, and we should take a look at how this command looks. So we have running, we have this forward dash, which is still saying has used command to be true. Now, dashing isn't doing that. If we dash, it uses it and it resets it right away. So note that we don't want to just do the running like we're doing and have nothing in the state transition like we have here. I just wanted to show you the difference. We don't have to call that end attack transition and reset everything. And reset the movement, the attack state, that sort of stuff. Instead, what we can do is I have something called end command transition that we set up a while ago. You can see I'm actually calling it here in the start attack transition, but we don't do that for the run on purpose. Okay, but the end command transition resets the commands so that none of them are currently being used. This is what we need. So instead of doing the start attack transition for the run, we can actually just use this event. So say we pass in, okay, so you see walking forward to running forward, start transition event, instead of being start attack transition, it can actually be end command transition. All right. Now let's try this again. Make sure everything still works as expected. Skip our intro. You can see I can still run. And I can run again, I can attack, everything's working. Now let's look at the world outliner again. Let's go to the mutant BP. And it's already here. So see, I'm running. It resets. I'm still running because I'm still in the state. It just means that the command hasn't been used again. This is good because when I exit this, I'm still going to go back to the idle state. It's just that command resets. Okay, so make sure you do that Don't fall into the same trap. Don't use start attack transition or you'll run into trouble. One additional note that I actually did figure out now that was unrelated to what I was trying to show. That point I was trying to prove. This point I wasn't trying to prove, but I saw it while we were here, so we might as well fix it up. If you are doing any sort of attack, right? I go attack startup, active recovery, and I go like running forward. Everything resets properly. But if I do backward dash, I actually go to attack recovery and not back to none. Technically, that's okay in a lot of cases, like if you're just moving again afterward, but it could cause some potential issues. So we should make sure that we go back to none once we are done with dashing backward. Has this and a notify at the end, which is triggering, but it's triggering a little too late, and it's most likely being the blend time is allowing this to occur after we've reset it. So I'm going to move this back a little bit, put it into recovery, something like this. And now when I am to do this again, you should see that that is no longer an issue. So you got to be careful with things like that too, or you could remove the blend time. There's a lot of different ways to fix this sort of thing, but just something to think about. There you go. Now, backward dash does not leave the attack state in recovery. You may need to do the same for your forward dash as well, depending on if you get that issue or not. This one's a little bit farther up, but I'll just move it back for safety reasons, because I don't have specific frames in mind to do any of this stuff yet. It's all just arbitrary to get it working. Of course, when you're being really specific, going over the moves, testing everything out, then you can put it at the proper frame. If you're at that stage, of course, feel free to do it now. But I'm not going to, because I'm not at that stage. Alright, with all that said, now everything is working as intended for dashes and runs. Something you may want to do is allow the character to push another character while dashing or while running. That is something we have not covered yet, but we can cover that in our base character BP. So on component hit in our base character BP, we had character state equals moving forward equals moving backward, or, and if it's equal to either of those and the other character is in the idle or no action state, then it pushes them based off that direction. We're adding an actor world offset as opposed to manually like forcing them to be pressing an input, which is good and it will definitely work. But the problem is, if we're doing this, we have to make sure we're in a state that will match that. So moving forward, moving backward works great. This, or you can click add pin to add more statements, and so we can grab our character state, type equal equal enum, and then add them for dashing forward, dashing backward, running backward. This will get you set up for pretty much everything. Technically, dashes won't work yet for the pushing. This is just due to the way that the dash works, since it's adding a force. Okay, so let's say if we walk into our character, it works. If we are to run into our character, back up, here we go. If we run into our character, this also works. And technically, if you could ever get behind them without flipping, you could go the other direction and it would work as well. But let's switch back to the dash one more time. So I'll change running forward to dashing forward. And I will play this. And when we do this, you're going to see I can dash into my opponent and they don't move. This is because the actual movement and the component hit isn't triggering there. It's not triggering, hey, say I'm in the dashing forward state, I should go ahead and push this character. This is something we will fix in the next episode where we get into the movement. We'll do rolls next, and we'll cover why exactly this isn't working, and we'll fix it up for dashes, and then we'll fix it for the rolls as well, because the rolls will need that same functionality. So they are slightly different from a roll when getting knocked down. We do have these rolls here. I call them rolls, but it's just like wake up tech. We have these rolls here, and we can actually use these and roll into our opponents and do some other things from there. So I want to show that off as another movement technique, and then we'll get into how to actually push the character during these and during dashes. But there you go. If you add those to your base character BP, you'll be able to push your character now from all those states. And again, it's actually fine to put these dashes in now, even if they don't move them, because we're going to use them later. So I'd recommend just setting them all up now. And then we are good to go. Anyway, guys, that's all I got for you. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this helped you learn about running and dashing and how we can improve upon these techniques and add more functionality to them. You can probably see where this could go in the future, how you could add attacks specifically when in the running forward state, just like we have them in the jump state or in another attack state. So there's a lot of freedom here. There's a lot of different things we can do. And yeah, like I said, I just really hope you enjoyed and hope you learned something. If you did, please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel than anything else you can do, and I just really appreciate it. I want to give an incredibly large shout out to the Patreon members, the YouTube membership subscribers. Thank you guys for everything you've done. I am really grateful, really happy that you guys are showing me a lot of support. I appreciate it so much. I really love working on this series. I can't even tell you, so I'm glad you guys are enjoying it as much as I am. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. I'd be happy to get you sorted and fixed up so you can continue working on your series and having fun on your project. Anyway, guys, like I said, that's all I got, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.